Our next session will be Green Industrial Policy as a Driver of Economic Transformation. Please welcome to the stage your moderator, Eric Beinhocker.
Do we go, yeah?
Good afternoon. If we could have our panelists come join me up here on the stage. Thank you all for coming. I hope you all had a good lunch. I'm Eric Beinhocker. It's my pleasure to be moderating this panel on green industrial policy as a driver of economic transformation. And we have an outstanding group of panelists to discuss this important topic. We have Nicola Brandt, head of the OECD in Berlin. We have Patricia Fuller, President and CEO of the Institute for Sustainable Development. And we have Isabella Teixeira, former Minister of the Environment in Brazil and the Advisory Board for Brazilian Center for International Relations. Now, before I turn to our distinguished panelists for their opening remarks, I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes setting the stage a bit. Now, there's no question that we're facing some political and geopolitical headwinds in the world on this topic, especially with the change in U.S. administration. But it's also important to remember that we have some very strong economic and technological tailwinds behind us. And in fact, I would argue that these tailwinds are so strong that the clean energy revolution, I think we can even say, is unstoppable. The only question is, how fast will it go, and will it be fast enough to save the planet? And the most critical tailwind has been the huge decline in clean energy costs in wind, solar, batteries, and other clean tech. And although people are aware that these costs have come down, there's actually, it's not well understood just how fast this has happened and what it really means for the energy system. And in fact, even experts like at the International Energy Agency have misforecast these costs for decade on decade and underestimated how quickly they would come down. But the reality is these costs are actually falling exponentially, about 12% per year for solar and batteries, and following a pattern very much like the declines in costs of computers and mobile phones and things like that. In fact, there's evidence that clean tech follows a kind of Moore's law for clean energy. And just as Moore's law transformed the world in computing and other technologies, this decline in clean energy costs is transforming our world. And these costs are now going through tipping points where they have the potential to radically change energy systems. And I'll just give you one example. Pakistan has historically had a very expensive and not very well-functioning energy system. And it's about 49 gigawatts in total, of which 29 gigawatts is coal. Rest is mostly hydro and nuclear. Just last year, in 1 year alone, they imported 17 gigawatts of solar. And the year before that, they imported 8.5 gigawatts. And this was mostly very, very cheap solar that was coming in from their next-door neighbor, China. So in just 2 years, they have imported enough solar to essentially replace all of their fossil fuel electricity generation. Now, that's in theory. The practicalities of doing that will be something else. But it does show that when these prices pass a certain tipping point and when things get cheap enough, things can actually move and flip very quickly. Pakistan is also experiencing explosive growth now in batteries, electric scooters, and other things that are electrifying their economy. So the clean energy transition is no longer an economic burden to be avoided. It's now an opportunity to be seized. But there are lots of barriers to seizing this opportunity, not just for developing countries like Pakistan, but also for developed countries too. And throughout history, technology revolutions have needed government help to accelerate them and make them possible. And the energy transition is no different. The markets alone won't get us where we need to go. In particular, this is a very capital-intensive transition, so we need to mobilize lots and lots of capital, and again, particular issues with the developing world. We need to build public infrastructure, grids, EV charging stations. We need new and different supply chains. It's not realistic, politically or economically, to depend on just one country for many of these goods. And we need to support innovation in hard-to-abate sectors like steel and cement, aviation, and so on. And we also need different policies and regulations for our energy markets, which were built for fossil fuels. So in short, we need a systems approach looking across all these issues, and that brings us to our topic of industrial policy. That we need broad portfolios of policies well beyond the economist's favorite answer of carbon pricing and things like that, but policies that mobilize the whole economy to drive and accelerate this transition. Now, since this is a solution summit, I'm now going to turn to the panel and ask, what are our solutions in green industrial policy? What's working, what's not working, and what do we have to do differently? And maybe, Nicole, I'll start with you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for this very optimistic note in a world where it doesn't always look so bright, even the advancement of green technologies. What I want to, I don't know whether I have the solutions, but what I can contribute a little bit to the discussion is our research on green industrial policies and where they have been going a little bit. And there you could say, well, one point is there's a rising commitment. So 80% of the global economy is now covered by carbon neutrality pledges. And at the same time, we saw that between 2019 and 2021, green industrial policy spending was just 0.25% of GDP. So of course, industrial policy spending and subsidies is not everything, but we do believe there's a role for this to promote the development of, or the greening of industries. A point where we're also a bit concerned about is that when we look at the investment in innovation versus the investment in deployment, of course we do need to sometimes support, let's say, nascent industries, things like hydrogen, etc. But we do see that only 6.6% of the green stimulus that we saw during the COVID crisis went to research, development, and demonstration, and so around 8% to emerging technologies. So basically, everything else goes into the deployment of already existing industries and technologies. And of course, even if you say that this is needed to scale the adoption of some technologies, it's something that, in almost every model, there will be, the optimum will be a larger share going to research and development to really reduce further the costs of green technologies. And, but I don't want to say everything is spending, right? We know that we need a mix of policy tools, and you already made the points. We need infrastructure investment. We need green public procurement. We think there's a big role for that in order to help scaling markets. Of course, carbon pricing, a very difficult, economically very compelling one, politically often very difficult to move forward with it. And because we're in a group also with different, with the OECD, but also Brazil, different country perspectives. Another point I would like to make that it's, I think one solution that we really need is green energy or green industrial partnerships, because sometimes we have the sources of energy, possibilities to develop green hydrogen in countries, certainly not in Germany. Germany will have to import a lot. And there are opportunities in this in terms of working together, basically having a partnership with another country where with abundance of renewable energy, and then having also a trade relationship, if they still exist. The final point I want to make is perhaps about standards and trade from a European perspective. I think in this world we have more and more geopolitical tensions. The OECD, I don't know if everybody is familiar with that, but we have the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises, which is basically the basis for all these, I would say, corporate sustainability laws that we see in the EU, but also in other countries. And a lot came from the EU lately, and I think with all good intentions, but it's very important, and it's something we've been stressing for a long time, when we set sustainability standards, for example, in terms of environmental damage, but also, well, this is not green industrial policies, but human rights, it's very important to work together for countries and make sure that, make sure that if we see that a country already fights deforestation, you know, that we that we talk to each other and agree on what's the best way of doing it, what's the best way of measuring it, and so far so good for my introductory remarks.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Nicola. I'll now turn to Patricia. Was the picture I presented too optimistic? Is green industrial policy working? What else do we need to do?
Well, to the extent that the cost of clean energy has been driven down by industrial policy, you could say that it's been very successful. What has yet to happen is the transition part. So we're seeing addition of clean energy to the world's energy matrix, but we're seeing less transition away from fossil fuel sources of energy, and hence we don't see emissions coming down as quickly as needs to happen. And so that's the hard part of the energy transition. You could argue that the easier part is the addition of clean energy to the matrix. And it's where, as you said, Eric, there is a role for government, because this is a systemic transition that we need to make, and so there is certainly a role for government. It's not so long ago that industrial policy was very much out of fashion, almost a bad word, right? And there was a reason for that, because governments generally didn't do it well. And green industrial policy is still industrial policy. So one has to recognize it is hard to do it well, and in particular, it can be what is good for one country is bad for another. That's why we have, you know, the rules around subsidies in the WTO and so forth. So you know, we've talked at the summit about a world tending to my country first. Well, that's what we need to watch out for in green industrial policy. And again, it was not very long ago we were worried about the IRA sucking all of the investment in clean energies into the United States. So now the U.S. is pursuing a different kind of industrial policy through tariffs, one could say, but certainly that point is still relevant. That if it comes down to the countries with the deepest pockets that are able to implement green industrial policies, then we don't have a good outcome for many countries, and so what we need to be, I think, thinking about is, as countries pursue in green industrial policies, that they are also at the same time working to make value addition possible in developing countries through things like, you know, cooperation on CBAMs, the border carbon adjustments, making those transparent and harmonized and fair and so on, and also working to resolve this cost of capital issue, which is so much an impediment to investment in clean energy in developing countries where the cost of capital is very high. So.
Excellent. Well, that's a great transition to you, Isabella. Well, you've been in government. You've been responsible for these things. So can governments do green industrial policy well? And how can it work in countries that don't have the deep fiscal pockets of a US or EU, and countries that need to attract external capital?
Okay, thank you very much. Again, good afternoon for everyone. I know Brazil has a particular experience because you have energy mix based on renewable energy. Electric mix, our electric mix is 92% based on renewable. Okay, so if you want to discuss in industry, we have, based on the energy, you have a green industry in Brazil. Stop. But you don't want to pay the price for this when you go to international trade, for example. So we need to really frame things in different ways. Okay, and the big challenge for my country is how we keep walking green in energy and going together as a oil producer, a big one, and also make sure that energy security is a critical issue for us. Okay. Second, when you go to green industry, it's not only energy. Okay, you must have natural resource part of the supply chains and understand what green means. Okay, so in the past, industry policy, political industry, industrial policies means that you can have supply chains without considering the cost or the scarcity of natural resource. And today it's a reality. Okay, in the last 50 years, we raised more than 6 times the consumption of natural resource globally, and the scenarios show that around 6% in the next 20 years, and means that don't have natural resources to address the demands of supply chains and also business and industrial development around the world. When we go into climate change, we are fully dependent on electrification, decarbonization, green technology, absolutely intensive in energy and natural resource. Okay, so climate politics comes together with nature politics, not necessarily go to industry or consider green industry, because you need to understand the role of nature in not only biodiversity, but nature, natural resource, and how technology appropriates this. The other side of the coin is the geopolitical game. And geopolitics is part of the equation of power. But what's power today in this age? Means energy, okay, political power means energy, means supply chains, means technologies, means international trade. And you have the crisis of multilateral system to discuss green policy. So I understand that it would be very useful to know more about the bilateral and trilateral cooperations and how we can share interests if you don't have alternatives, for example. European countries don't have alternatives in critical minerals. We are not critical players on this. We don't have the assets. We need to cooperate, okay? And we need to cooperate in different ways. And this means that we need to come bilaterally, trilaterally to understand how we can share interests, and this is based also in green industry. So my understanding, based on my experience, is that we need to figure out things in different ways. If you keep walking, as we have been walking the last 40 years, again, you have trade-offs in short-term perspective, put the pressure on, consider geopolitical game. If you go into climate politics, we are discussing this outside multilateral systems. Like-minded blocks means this, G7, okay, G20, BRICS plus, okay, and compare the GDP of BRICS plus with G7. It's bigger. It's bigger. Compare the assets of BRICS plus countries with the G7s. You talk about credit carbon, I discuss with you carbon assets, because I have carbon assets. So we need to understand that things are changing, and I used to say that the world is updating. It's to upload things and download things, okay. But more than this, if you go into the solutions, and this is very important to observe, and you need solutions, which countries could come to provide solutions in short-term perspective, based on which agreements? And we have the polarized situation with China, India, Brazil, another one, United States, okay, part of the game. But to be pragmatic, to come together, to make sure the industry, and this is really critical because you have really well-structured supply chains that demands a lot and could make this difference. If you want to understand industries as a strategic pillar to change things, okay, it's not only the land and the raw materials, etc., but to understand how cannot more than add value, but understand how society must come together. And trade is critical for this. My last comment is say, in Brazil, you have now these public policies that the government took decision to play, considering new industry green policies the ecological transformation plan for our economy, again, tackling deforestation, blah, 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 blah. But what's key in this process now is the National Development Bank. You have a powerful development bank, national ones. We are 6 times bigger than IDB, okay? And our operations now, we finance 25% of our operations to finance industry is based on the green industry. So this is how we can have, well, some good tools to come together, World Bank or BRICS banks, etc., to promote investments and to provide international cooperation, solidarity with countries that need this. This could make the difference. In my country, it start doing, okay? But I understand that we need to remove barriers in short-term perspective and to make sure, and for this, we need really to have bilateral cooperation. My last comment, this moment is critical for Europe to come together with Brazil and vice versa. If you check the agreement, the bilateral cooperation that we have with China, we understand what I'm saying. Back to you.
Thank you as well. You raised the topic of cooperation, and probably an area where cooperation is most desperately needed is on moving capital, particularly to emerging economies for this transition. As the CEO of E.ON said yesterday, fossil fuel systems eat fossil fuels, clean energy eats capital. These are very capital-intensive transitions. I think we seem to be failing in that at the moment. The capital flows to the developing world are not adequate for that. And there's issues with already high debt levels. Do we need debt relief to create more space for more investment in clean energy and resilience and so on? And the politics of all that intersects with the broader geopolitics going on right now. So what's your view on where we stand on that issue? What can we do to mobilize capital to these actually economically positive, economically productive projects?
Well, I think we've heard a number of voices in this session talking about some solutions around cost of capital. I mean, one that I've heard a couple of times in these days, these 2 days, has been looking at the credit rating agencies and how those assessments are disfavoring emerging economies in a way that should be addressed. So that's one solution that's been referenced, and then of course reforms around the multilateral development banks and having a better approach to mobilizing private capital by being really more focused and deliberate around what is the role of MDBs, public finance, where it's most needed, and how is it leveraged the best to bring in private sector capital. But it's not just around the cost of capital and availability. It is also around the environment for these projects to be successful in, and the domestic policy environment in particular. And I think that's why the joint energy transition partnerships have held a lot of promise. I think there's still a lot of work to do to make those work, but I'm generally getting the sense that there's a view that this is an effective approach, in the sense that it brings together all of the players in a forum which is very much driven by the national government, to have those conversations around what needs to happen, both around policies in those domestic spaces, as well as who is going to put the capital in a way that can break through some of these barriers. So I think whether it's JETPs or country platforms, that is one element of the solution that needs to be supported. The G7 played an important role in the start of those, so it needs to continue to play that role, and needs to work effectively with the G20 to make these kinds of solutions move forward.
Excellent. Nicola, any thoughts on moving capital and how we shift from this kind of more project traditional MDB approach to more of an economic transformation approach?
I think you already made the points, right? It's a question about really being more, well, working together even for different MDBs to make sure that the way this green transition is financed is really used best in order to leverage private funding. And of course, the policy environment in some emerging or developing countries is an issue, but the partnerships or the green transition partnerships, energy transition partnerships hold a lot of promise here. And if I may, just to add what Isabella said, it's really true. It's a very difficult world, of course, and industrial policies hold their own issues in terms of trade and competition. But for any issue, but perhaps more than any other issue, the green transition, countries depend very much on each other in terms of raw materials, etc., but also technologies. And it's important to recognize that, to see the potential sometimes of nature, sometimes of renewable energy abundance, and build partnerships around that. Then the money will flow, I think.
Excellent. Now, this is my last question for the panel, and I'm going to shortly turn it over to all of you. So please start preparing your challenging questions. I want to pick up on something Isabella said, which she talked about the politics of green industrial policy. One thing I'm noting in my own home country, as you can tell by my accent, US, is the politics of climate change and the politics of clean energy and industrial policy are not the same. Mm-hmm. So the politics of climate change has gotten very wrapped up in the culture wars, and what you believe depends on which tribe you're a part of. Whereas the politics of clean energy and industrial policy tend to be more, interest group politics, interest in states and regions and different industries and consumers and so on. So we're seeing in the US, even though big reversals on climate policy, we had, I think it was 7 Republican senators writing to hang on to some of the IRA subsidies because they're benefiting their states. So a question for you is, can, even as we continue to try to fight all the good fights on climate change, can we use green industrial policy, not necessarily for a kind of green populism, but certainly to have policies that are popular and generate broad-based electoral support? Who would like to?
Okay, I can try to answer, but I'd like to remember you. 1 week ago, we have the spring meetings in Washington discussing finance. Okay, and guys, nobody's discussing climate change. I'm sorry. Our bubble, we are discussing, but around the world, I have been in different meetings. Really, we have a new geopolitical conditions in the room. And this is very important to be observed. Okay, it's impressive that we have some authorities that 2 years ago used to discuss green and now avoid to mention this. Okay, and this is really impactful considering the problems that you have and how industry is critical to move the needle faster or not. Because this well-structured consider development, the trade-offs on short-term perspectives. My first point. The second point, okay, you have scarcity of natural resources that will impact the supply chains. And you have also something new in the scenarios, because climate change is not something that will happen, this is happening. So climate risks, we don't know yet how this will impact the financial flows and also the cost of money, considering the international financial system. Okay? And so this will land on the supply chains, of course, and the economy, economic growth, and also geopolitical power. And industry is absolutely critical for this. Okay? It's easy, you can illustrate this in different ways. You can go, for example, as solutions for aviation and go into sustainable fuels, agricultural fuels, and the barriers that you have today to discuss this. And tell me, which companies that produce aircraft have technology today to produce new aircraft without fossil fuels. Brazilian company, Embraer, that's so powerful, has. Okay, so this is, how would you like to attend the demands of sustainable fuels for Chinese aviation or for Europe aviation? Check what's happened. This is the rule. Our industry will come to say we want to address this in this way or not. So to be pragmatic and to understand, we always understand this in Brazil, that climate agenda is a development agenda. We're discussing development, how we should develop this age or this century based having nature as really a critical partner. It's not someone that I can ignore or something, no, this is not important. No. And also how the countries will come together to provide development solutions. And that's why private sector is so important. And my last comment. The international governance on climate change that you have today is not prepared to manage non-state actors. We are prepared to manage in our governance state actors. But you go into the regulations and go the role to metrics to understand how you go to have the private sector and non-state members together in action agenda. That this is the critical branch of COP30 now, because you have negotiation of state members and non-state members coming with responsibilities to manage solutions. Are you prepared to discuss global governance and new governance in the crisis of multilateral system, of international cooperation with new international order, emerging new international order, and also this fragmentation of the international cooperation system? How would you like to invite the private sector to say, I trust you? So be prepared for a transition. This is transition, but I do believe that industry will be absolutely critical to connect the dots and make sure if we have shortcuts or not. So let's do it because we're very fascinating the next 5 or 10 years. I hope so.
Big challenges. Thoughts on how we create a durable political support behind these policies?
Well, I mean, one would hope that clean air would be a good way to have green policies be popular, and many other benefits of renewable energy. But it's true that we are seeing backlash against clean energy policies, and I think the bottom line, it's pretty clear, it needs to help with affordability. And we know it will in the medium long term. You started us off with the data around the cost declines in clean energy, and we know in the majority of cases renewable energy options are the cheaper option for electricity generation around the world. But there is that high cost of capital at the front end, and this is the hard part of transition. That in the shorter term, we're seeing in some situations implementing these policies leads to higher prices in the short term, and so I think what's clear is that's the part that governments need to navigate through and need to do it in a way that households are particularly lower income households are protected from those short-term price increases.
Some final thoughts on this topic from you, Nicola, before I turn it over to our audience? Yeah.
Well, one point is really, as you said, showing the opportunities, perhaps less, because the US example is still a lot about subsidies, but of course also economics, nascent economic successes. So that's important. If you see that, then politics can come in, or policies can come in to promote it. Certainly very important to cushion the transition costs in terms of affordability. But I think another point is really skills. There will be skills shortages in the new greener industries, and also it will not be easy for everybody to adjust. So good green industrial policy comes also with reskilling policies, and that's important. Then people can see the opportunities, and you build a constituency.
Yeah, like any transition, there will be winners and losers, and we need to help the winners push this along, but also not forget people who feel like they're being left out. Excellent. over to all of you. If you have a question, I'd please ask for questions rather than speeches. So a succinct question for our distinguished panel. Just raise your hand and a microphone will come to you. Gentlemen over here. And I'm going to take, say, 3 questions and then turn it to the panel.
First of all, I would really thankful to Isabella. I have rarely seen a speaker who is speaking very honestly on the global issues, particularly related with energy. So my main question is around clean energy. I think today, when we are speaking, we are getting around terawatts of clean energy input in our energy market. So when that time will come, when we really think about the planet and we will really work about the betterment of planet, because when we have already got terawatts of energy from clean sources and we are still using the same amount of fossil fuels on the planet. So when that time actually will arise, when we really think that fossil fuels is not really a useful or maybe a clean usefulness of planet. So just a curiosity, would it be when it would be saturated from the planet? Thank you.
Thank you. Next question. Yes, this gentleman over here.
I'm Sa from the University of Cologne. My question is to know, clean energy seems from the discussion to focus very much on avoiding emissions. It seems that the other pieces of ecological flourishing are missing. Like, what do we do when we displace or destroy biodiversity on the construction sites of clean energy infrastructure? And also, how do we address issues of injustices like displacing local communities where the clean infrastructure has to be built? Thank you.
Thank you. One more question? Oh, sorry, I couldn't see you, sir. Yep, down there.
Thank you so much. Just a quick one. You mentioned the role of the private sector, and my question is if you can kindly elaborate a bit further on the role of the private sector in managing the transition.
Excellent. Thank you. So a variety of questions. I'll let you each pick which ones you want to address, but we had some questions about the additionality versus transition of fossil fuels, and are we actually going to eliminate fossil fuels, not just build more clean energy? The question about we have to look at the whole ecological life cycle and the impact of these things, and also justice issues, and critically the role of the private sector. So why don't I start with you, Nicola, and you can try and address all 3 very briefly, or pick one.
I think the one about, the way I understand it was about, the broader life cycle issues or biodiversity. I think that's very important. Biodiversity is our, next big or current big challenge, but perhaps it doesn't get all that much attention as climate policies. And of course, there can be injustices when displacing local communities. It's very important to think these things together and to take them into account. It doesn't make the task always easier, but sometimes, there can be, these goals can be in harmony. For example, if we are moving more to a circular economy, there can be a lot of CO2 emissions avoided, and at the same time, we can be friendlier to nature in general. And then the injustices, it's something of course to address through local and also international policies. I was talking about these international standards, how multinational enterprises should behave along there, how they should make sure that there are some safeguards, compliance along their supply chains. Not easy to implement, but yet another issues where countries will have to work together to make sure that they find the best solution. But sometimes there are trade-offs. I think there's simply trade-offs there where we we'll need to make a decision about whether we want another, wind turbine and endanger some birds, or how we find the right balance.
And on this ecological footprint, I'll just add that there's no energy sources that are zero footprint. So that's just not possible. But very good life cycle analyses showing that these technologies, their footprints, even though they require mining and minerals and other things, still orders of magnitude less than the footprints that fossil fuels are leaving. And there's room to improve the footprints of these technologies.
That's exactly the point I wanted to make, that when we talk about choices and if there's debates about adding fossil fuel supply, that implies also a major impact in terms of pipelines, refineries, all of that, even without considering the climate impact. So you do have to put that on the table, and it's, I think, important in the conversation around clean energy to bring that forward, and also to bring forward the question of fossil fuel subsidies. We've talked about how clean energy is more competitive, but that's even in a context where, in fact, fossil fuels are still supported by significant subsidies. So to the point about the question of when do we get to a point of moving away from fossil fuels, certainly a big part of that is to remove subsidies that are supporting fossil fuels. Again, not easy to do, particularly if they're on consumption, but important to do. And in all of this is where it comes to the role of government, setting standards for things like environmental and social impact, and the need to consult with local communities and all of that. So to the question of the role of the private sector has got to be the driver of these investments, but it needs to be in a context where there's a good policy framework, good standards that hold companies to account and ensure that environmental impacts are minimized, and that communities have a strong stake in these projects and participate positively.
Excellent, thanks. Well, we're almost out of time, but I'm going to give you the last word as well. You've got about 1 minute.
I wanted to observe that you have a really a special momentum today in the world when you go to climate politics and the geopolitical game and nature politics. And it's important that we need to manage better the trade-offs considering short-term perspective. This means which countries could provide solutions and consider the basis to provide solutions. And this is very important for the private sector engagement. Okay. Second, we cannot forget that peace is back as a powerful asset for investments. Okay, and how the costs for the weapons, etc., will impact the global financial is impacting. It also will keep impacting the costs, the economy in the world. Third, I think that private sector has responsibility to be engaged, but private sector needs really clear regulatory arrangements and also tools, and make sure that they have be profitable, and the capex they can pay for this. This is based on reality. This is business model, okay? And you need to change because of risks. And also you need to understand how the public concessions models must change. In my country that we have renewable energy and the interlinked national electric system, all the private investments and private concessions, you don't dare to have the contracts. Not necessarily we frame the climate risks because they are old ones. And the climate risk is present today with extreme events. So it means additional costs. So, and also my last comment is that we are in the moment of the world, we are adding energy. You are right. It's energy addition. It's not energy transition. You're not replacing energy source. Go to India, where we have more than 1.5 billion people, and we have people without accessing energy. Access energy has a social cost, not only environmental cost. Okay? So we need to frame things based on the reality. We have been discussing climate change the last 40 years. Good. but frame this based on the reality of the world today, and we need probably to come together to understand energy addition, not only because we have technological demands for energy, because we have population growth, but because the world is warming, the temperature is raised, so we need cooling, okay? And 90% of the additional demand of energy next year based on the extreme events. So we need to check this. We need to understand where we are and come to the okay, climate solutions must be part of this, but probably this transition is also for climate solutions, because we need to face the reality, and the reality is not only because of the geopolitical conditions of some countries, but because the world changed. As simple as that. Everything's changed, and we need to change our mindset to tackle climate change.
Excellent. Well, we are out of time. I'm not going to even attempt to summarize this wide-ranging discussion, but just close us saying, we know we need a transition, but the good news is we know some things, at least, that are working, and some policies that are helping that. So let's do more of what works. Let's all thank our distinguished panel, and then there'll be a short break before the next session. Thank you very much.